Welcome everyone to Next Economy Conversations. We are so delighted that you're joining us today, and if you're meeting us for the first time, welcome. The Center for Social Innovation is a community co-working space and launchpad for entrepreneurs, organizations, and companies that are changing the world by putting people and planet first. Across our locations in Toronto, there are about 1,000 social purpose organizations that call CSI their work home, and that translates to about 3,000 people. In these times, we are a vibrant online community, and we continue to offer daily opportunities for our members to virtually gather, learn, and collaborate together, including community events, education programs, and acceleration programs. The Center for Social Innovation Institute is our affiliate charity, and we help Canadians use social innovation to get to the root causes of system-level problems. Our title sponsor for Next Economy Conversations is Fix. Fix is the easiest way to plan, track, and optimize maintenance. They're the first open computerized maintenance system platform that mixes innovative technology with a focus on partnering with customers to help them organize assets, manage work, connect to business systems, and make data-driven decisions. More than 2,600 companies in over 90 countries trust Fix to help evaluate, buy, implement maintenance software, and simplify their journey to modern maintenance. As I mentioned, this is Next Economy Conversations, where you will hear from incredible leaders who are helping to make the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic one that creates positive change and that builds the next economy, one that is sustainable, equitable, and prosperous for all. Each month, we invite a new guest to hear about their personal journeys, successes, and visions for the future. At CSI, we always start our events with an acknowledgement of the land, even when we're hosting virtual events. So this morning, we want to acknowledge that for those of us who are in Toronto, we're gathering on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Seneca, and the Mississauga of the Credit First Nations. As we think and talk about social innovation, we are sometimes discussing a shared vision for a sustainable and just future. However, it's critical that we also reflect on the past and the present to consider how we can strive towards more inclusive, resilient communities that incorporate and respect many different ways of knowing and being. And as we move our work and our lives into the digital realm, this also means considering how patterns of inequality can transcend into these spaces. So on that note, we want to share this quote from Alexander Dirksen on decolonizing digital spaces. Meaningful change begins with recognition of technological innovation as a fundamentally human endeavor. Behind the sleek glass and metal enclosures of our lithium-charged lifelines are people, with each line of code carrying with it all the complexities of human existence. Technology is not a neutral force, nor are digital spaces safe spaces for all, instead mirroring, replicating, and at times exacerbating the real and pressing realities faced by Indigenous peoples and other marginalized communities in physical spaces. A social justice lens must therefore be applied to all that we discuss, design, and develop in the digital realm. So we encourage you to consider what it might look like in your work to apply a social justice lens, whether you're also hosting emergent conversations or if you're participating in them and shaping them. And you can look at this resource called Native Land to learn more about the land that you're on. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our guest for this month, Chris Caners, who is the General Manager at SolarShare. SolarShare is a not-for-profit cooperative that owns, finances, and operates 49 solar facilities across Ontario, whose more than 1,900 members have invested $60 million in local democratically controlled solar energy assets. As Canada's leading renewable energy co-op, SolarShare makes it easy for Ontario residents to invest in solar energy installations that earn an impressive return while doing something good for the planet. Chris is a professional engineer and the general manager at SolarShare. He's responsible to the board of directors for SolarShare's operations, finance, business development, and strategy. Earlier in his career, Chris was a senior manager with the International Energy and Environmental Consultancy, ICF, and he has also worked with the innovative Kenyan company M-Kopa Solar and was the manager of the University of Toronto Sustainability Office. Chris will be in conversation today with our CEO at the Center for Social Innovation, Tanya Sermon. Tanya is fueled by her belief in the power of collaboration and belonging. She knows that putting the right people in a room is only the first step in creating real change. You also need to build a culture where everyone knows they have a value and a voice to radically redesign our futures. She did this with the Center for Social Innovation, which reinvented the workplace by collecting social purpose organizations under one roof. She did this with community bonds, an innovation that allows a nonprofit to turn their social capital into financial capital. And it's what she's doing with the Center for Social Innovation Institute and Social Innovation Canada, unlocking the social innovation community to get at the root causes of problems. She knows that building relationships between people is the foundation for a better world, and it's also a heck of a lot of fun. So Tanya, I'll hand it over to you to get the conversation started.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Zoya, and welcome, Chris. It's great to have you here. A little frazzled. I got to this Zoom meeting a little late, so I'm kind of getting myself in here, and we're so excited to have you. And just a word or two about these conversations. CSI, as you and many of the other people I recognize from the chat, is deeply and profoundly committed to adapting and reinventing this capitalism that we have right now that is is not as inclusive, regenerative, it's exploitative of people and planet in many, many cases, and to take this moment in time to start building a vision and proving that the next economy is possible. Very often, I think that it's a problem of imagination. So many of us just can't imagine that we might be able to have an economic system that actually puts people and planet first. But that is where SolarShare is doing phenomenal things, blowing our minds and reinventing the way we think about how we create power in our province. So I am so delighted to have you here, and so delighted to have so many wonderful people from the cooperative movement, from Tapestry Capital, and hopefully many, many other folks who will be able to play with us today and explore how did SolarShare do this, and what's next. So lots of really, really good stuff. But Chris, just to get us started, because I've really literally just met you, hello.
Hi. I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with everyone. It's a great honor.
Fabulous. And so tell us a little bit about you before we get to SolarShare, because we're going to talk all about it. Just where, engineering, energy efficiency, just tell us, how did you get to this moment in time, and what is the passion behind your work?
Yeah, I guess, I started, I don't know if there was a formative moment. I was thinking about this talk and some of the things that brought me to environment and social justice. I think when I was younger, in my early 20s, I came more to activism. And there was a couple of things, I started getting involved in helping to start a community garden. And it sort of started from there. I remember going with a friend to see, he was doing some work rurally, and we had to go and throw out the garbage. And we went to this garbage dump, and we went just literally threw the garbage onto the ground. And I was pretty young at the time, but I was like, wow, this is like, that's what happens. Like, you just sort of throw it there. That's what happened. And it's a stupid or silly thing it's a small thing, but it was meaningful to me at the time, I think. And that experiences like that, I think, pushed me more towards energy. I started in engineering. I got an interest in energy, and I started studying fuel cell technology. I worked in research and development on that, and it just sort of led from one thing to the other. I went to the sustainability office at U of T, started doing greenhouse gas work, and climate was becoming much more of a topic, and I wanted to do more on that. So I started looking for work to do that, and that's where I started doing work in consulting. And when I saw the opportunity to work with SolarShare, I thought it was a really nice. I certainly can't take credit for any of the start of SolarShare. Certainly, it's lots of people put lots of hard work in. But SolarShare, when I found it, it really spoke to me in terms of the community aspect of it, the democratic control of it, the finance. Like I started working in all this stuff in greenhouse gases and energy efficiency, and I started to realize how important and again, sort of maybe a silly realization, but how important the money is. It's for better or worse, it's really important if you want to get these kinds of things done. And so I said, I better figure that out. So SolarShare seemed like a perfect opportunity, and it really spoke to my values and what I want to be doing. So that's sort of how I ended up where I am.
That's fantastic. And, it's funny, if you go back to this question, I really resonate with this idea of efficiency. I think that when we started CSI, bizarrely, it was this idea that there was inefficient, like one photocopier for one organization when they're all so small. Like, how do we become more efficient? And the same thing with environment. So I get it. Like, it's sometimes the smallest little things that trigger us that go, oh, that's not right. I can do something about that. So, and
Yeah.
you took a walk through Nairobi and did some work there. So tell us experience there in East Africa.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I lived in a town called Eldoret. My wife Victoria, she's doing her PhD in public health, and so we lived in Western Kenya for a couple of years. And during that time, I was lucky, and I mean that was a really lucky thing to get to do, a really privileged thing to get to do. It's not everyone gets to go and live in a different country, and so that was a great experience. And I worked with this company called M-Kopa. I'm sure some of the folks on the call have heard of them, but they had a very interesting financing model whereby people in Kenya could get a solar battery sort of charging. It would give them LED light. They could pay for it over time because cash flow is a huge issue and people don't have a lot of capital up front. It would displace the use of kerosene for light, which causes indoor air quality and burns a lot of the time. And you can also sell the power to your neighbors to charge your cell phone. Often people would have to walk a long way to charge their cell phone at some diesel generator. So it was really interesting, and I started working with them on trying to develop something similar, a pumping system for smallholder farmers, which is the majority of Kenyan farming. So it was really, really interesting. I think it's it was an importance of the finance that was really important, and it's also, I think it's great. And I guess I wonder about, I'm not an expert in any of this, but it's the role of Western companies and Western finance in developing countries is problematic in a lot of ways. And it's, there's good things and bad things, I think, but it makes me think about those things too. Like, how can we, and part of what I want to do at SolarShare, it's a local thing. How can we support local resilience and local financing, and it gets a lot better, I think, if we, not that we shouldn't be working together, but that we have that resilience within the community, and then also are able to support that, from external sources as well. But it gets challenging, obviously, and I'm sure people would know more about that than I do. But that's what it tells me.
Almost a segue into community power, but before we get right into community power and enterprise and bonds and all the goodness, just for those of us who are new to SolarShare, which would be shocking, but just in case there are some folks that are new, maybe just tell us a little bit about SolarShare as a project of Trek, the vision of Trek, feel free to kind of, we share a board member, Brian Eiler, who is, I know has been so profoundly pivotal to pushing for around community power, and tell some great stories. So maybe just give us an introduction to those three ideas: SolarShare, Trek, community power, and how they all fit together and what you guys actually do. Yeah.
Right. So, I think there's folks who were very dedicated to start Trek. Trek has been around, and other folks, I think David Robertson would know better than I would, but Trek was started quite a while ago. You're right, Brian Eiler, David Robertson, Mike Brigham, a bunch of people who I will fail to mention, I'm sure, but put a lot of effort, time, money, sweat and tears into it. And I think, fundamentally, from my perspective anyway, I think the thing that I'm excited about, and if I think what organizations like Trek are excited about, is really the participation and role of community in our day-to-day lives, and our in SolarShare's case, in infrastructure. But I personally, I take that further. I think the kinds of ways in which we can, like, cooperative model is a great model. I'm on the Ontario Cooperative Association board, and it really speaks to me about democratic control. And you were talking earlier, Tanya, about what ails us in terms of our capitalist system. And I think a lot of that could be solved if imagine a future in which organizations were democratically controlled. So it wasn't how much money you put in. It's I think it's a lot harder for things to go sideways in terms of taking advantage of people if you have a membership that's based on democratic control rather than how much money you're putting into it. And so I think, I'm not sure, I'm paraphrasing what Trek wants to do exactly, and we've just went through a really great exercise with Trek in terms of visioning the future with Rebecca Black, and that was a really interesting exercise. But I think for me, what it means, at least, and for what SolarShare means, I think democratic control and of infrastructure in SolarShare's case, but I could see it for lots of different cases, is one path, I think, to a better future and a more equitable future for all of us. And I think if we can, I'm interested in furthering that, not just in SolarShare's case, but what's the next thing after SolarShare? I want more of SolarShare. SolarShare doesn't need to be the biggest, baddest, meanest, renewable energy cooperative there is. I think there's room for lots and lots of organizations like that. And I'd like to see, that's what I'm interested in doing, pursuing that sort of path of democratic control.
So there's sort of two pieces here that are fun, and I'm gonna I have lots of other questions, but I just want to riff on that and say, the democratic control is one key component we see emerging as a part of the next economy, and shareholder involvement, employee ownership. We had Bill Young speaking about that, and ESCOs and the emergence of this. And of course, we've had some real knocks to consumer co-ops with the loss of MEC has been devastating, I know, for the sector. But I absolutely agree that this idea of how we own and how we control access to our infrastructure is critical. And I think what you were talking about, of course, the financing side of things is also so key. And we're seeing some amazing social innovations or social finance innovations. And certainly with the community bond, CSI has had some obviously very, very direct involvement in raising those dollars. So for people who don't know, CSI has raised over $7 million to be able to buy two pieces of real estate in downtown Toronto that before COVID were worth about 45 million. Who knows what they're worth now? I'm afraid to ask. But you guys have raised over $60 million with the SolarShare. And that is just at a scaled level that just delights me. So just tell us about how the SolarShare concept where it came from, and what it's been able to do.
Yeah, so I think visionary folks like you were mentioning, Brian Eiler, I think folks like that had a great vision for this. It came really out of the Green Energy Act, and the reason that SolarShare can do what we do and the way we've set up our model is really around the feed-in tariff contracts. And that's not to say, I think, SolarShare is a specific thing. I'm a big fan of looking at other ways in which we can apply the cooperative or a democratically controlled model or a not-for-profit model. But in our case, it came out of the Green Energy Act. The feed-in tariff contracts, the government saw fit to, no pun intended, to put have set-asides for, or parts of the some parts of the infrastructure that was being bid on for solar for municipalities, First Nations, and cooperatives. And so that's how SolarShare started, and we basically went from there and started buying more projects and develop more projects, and through the feed-in tariff program, which really means it's a contract with the government of Ontario, effectively, to give you 20 years at a fixed rate for the electricity you can produce. And so because we understand generally how much solar energy we're going to produce, we can do that with some certainty, and then we can sell bonds, which are sort of fixed income product. So it's not an equity product we offer, despite some people get confused because it's SolarShare. It sounds like we're offering shares, we're offering bonds actually, but that's how we can do that. So we're 100% debt finance. So we offer bonds to all our members. And I think, that's it. So it's sort of a unique model, and we're trying to do more of that. It's not the only way you could set it up, but it makes it easier for us because of those longer term contracts. And I think the other thing that we did is that I think I'm really proud of that SolarShare does is that, we're a retail investment opportunity. It's hard for folks to go and find opportunities to invest unless you're an accredited investor. So unless you're very wealthy, it's hard to go and, you can't, we're not all, the Tom Rands of the world who can go and do this kind of stuff. That's awesome. Good for, good for folks who are doing that and putting lots of money into it. But for most of us, it's hard to find those kinds of opportunities. And I think that's really valuable what SolarShare adds, because you can become a member of SolarShare. You can participate in owning the infrastructure that benefits us as Ontarians, and you can also make, a reasonable return from it.
What is the return, Chris?
4%. We offer a 5-year bond right now at 4% annually.
Nice. And CSI started at 4%. I think you guys started at 5%. Is that right?
We did. Yeah, we did. We had 2 products. We had a 5% bond for 5 years and annually, and we had a 15-year bond that we offered 6% on, but it self-amortizes, so the principal declines like a mortgage over time. So we had those products. So now we're at 4%. We have had about 10 years of experience now operating our projects. We've returned more than $7 million, not returned, but paid out more than $7 million in interest. We've sold $60 million worth of bonds. We have close to 2,000 members. So I think, I think we feel like we have a good track record now, and we have lots of assets under management. So it's, so that's why we reflected that in the interest rate.
We got started around the same time. I think CSI did the community bond, and that played such a pivotal role. Brian's brain went from one board to the other board, and looking at all the sort of community wealth building and watching the evolution of SolarShare over the years has been amazing. But I will say my highlight moment, I was blown away. I'm on the street downtown Toronto. A TTC bus goes by, and there's a SolarShare sales pitch on the side of the bus. And I was like, we've made it. Like, we made it. It felt so good. And I think it really speaks to this retail investor and 1,900 investors. And what would you say is the average size of investment? Do you have that or know that?
Yeah, no, it's $20,000 or so.
20,000. And I know that we've done a lot of work with Trek, allied across the organizations around the RRSP eligibility. And I'm curious where you guys are at with the RRSP eligibility.
Sure.
Because I know it's been a bit of a mess.
Yeah, it's challenging. Yes, we about 15% of the bonds that we sell go into registered accounts. We work with our friends at the Canadian Workers Cooperative Federation for our members to hold their bonds in registered accounts, so whether it's an RRSP or TFSA with CWCF. Other members have been able to work with their own financial institutions to hold our bonds in registered account at those financial institutions, but that's less likely, and you typically need to have some reason for the bank or the financial institution to let you do that. So you have to be accredited, or you know them really well, or whatever. It's so it's very challenging. Otherwise, there's different. We're regulated differently. So we're not regulated by the OSC. We're not in exempt markets. We are regulated by the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, which specifically regulates cooperatives and how they raise capital. And so it's a little bit of a different thing. Financial institutions don't necessarily understand it as well, and they see, when we talk to them, they basically say, "Listen, it's we just don't see the market for it." Yeah. Great, we would do it, but no one's banging down our door. And we're 2,000 members. We're not a huge number, but I'd love to see that change. I think it's encouraging community ownership, encouraging local investment. I don't see as a bad thing, and we've tried to look at ways to get around some of the challenges those institutions face. For instance, we have physical bond certificates, which means that they have to hold a bond certificate in a safe at their financial institution. Well,
they don't like that.
They don't like it. No, that's fine. So, but electronic is challenging and costly, et cetera, et cetera. So, we're trying to work around that, but I think fundamentally those financial institutions just don't see the market for it.
When I was, we had just done the community bond, and we convened a group of the 4 of the 5 big banks to introduce them to this idea. I think somebody from Trek was there, and I have to say, in all of my career, I have been responsible for influencing many policy changes and many different kinds of impacts and innovations. And I have never felt so beaten down and defeated as I did after dealing with the 5 big banks. It was,
Sure.
I cried. I literally cried in frustration because it was so clear that the only way that they would be interested in is it a big enough market? Is there more profit for us? And they are structured in such a way that the rich get richer and the
Mhm.
poor get poorer. And I just felt so profoundly defeated by the structural change. And yet what we're both doing with this infrastructure is we're really trying to democratize access to ethical investments.
Mhm.
We're actually trying to find investment opportunities for everyday people to be able to reflect their values. And I guess one of the questions that, and I want to just say, I'm actually really, it's important for folks to know that there's a very big difference in the way that TREC and SolarShare is regulated versus a nonprofit, or what Tapestry Capital's work is really focused on, which is on helping nonprofit organizations to do community bond issues. And that you do have your own act, and in the nonprofit sector, you're part of an exempt market, and it is quite different. So just for folks out there to know that there are 2 regulatory infrastructures available for people who would like to do the bonds, but you must be a nonprofit or a co-op to do it. So it's not a great tool for small businesses who want to start cafes and what have you. So just to kind of put that out there.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but I did want to, oh, I had a great question and now I forgot it because I'm getting old, but I'm going to go back. I'll go back and I'll go in here. Oh yeah, the question I have is like, where can you see the solar share or that bond instrument growing? What's your sort of ideas around where you can see it really resonating and working for folks in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it depends on, for SolarShare, I'll start with SolarShare. I mean, what we want to do is buy more feed into long-term solar projects with long-term contracts because it fits with the model that we're doing. That's how we do. Um, that's how we do the work we do now, and why we can offer bonds. So I guess you don't necessarily need to offer a bond. You could offer equity. You could do different. You could do a mixture of those 2 things. It really depends, and that gets complicated. But I mean, I see it. I think the thing that I'm really excited about is, and I think the next step in my mind is more infrastructure. I mean, I think you can see, look at Germany, they've done a lot of community ownership. It's the example that everyone uses. But the same way with SolarShare, I think more of that. There's other cooperatives in Ontario, OREC, KEDCO, like there's a bunch of other cooperatives that do the same thing that we do. And I think more of that is good. I'd like to see more community power, community owned infrastructure. I think that's an easy one to do, because not easy, but there's an asset by which you can back your bonds or your equity with, and community ownership of those assets, I think, is a great thing, especially given the climate crisis. We're interested in more distributed renewable energy. I mean, I kind of come from energy, so I'm interested in that. So the more that's the kind of thing I gravitate to. But I don't think there's any reason. Like, I mean, you guys at CSI are doing a great job. You can buy a building. I don't see a reason why we wouldn't want more nonprofits to own an asset like a building.
What's holding us back, Chris? From your perspective, what's holding us back? Why aren't we seeing more of these community infrastructure projects emerging?
Well, I think it's complicated. I mean, the reason that that I think it worked for us is because of the way that the government set it up in the first place. And I think ultimately, it's a slightly different model. I guess I think that we need to value that more in the work that we're doing. I think better democratic participation in our government, and better democratic participation in our organizations and companies is something that I'd like to see. But it's challenging, and it's harder to raise money. Like, if you want to go and be a developer and raise a bunch of money from a financial institution, it's easier to raise $100 million from one place than $100 million from 20,000 people. So that makes it a lot harder. And I think there's not really incentives set up to do that. So it comes to mind, I think the Ford government just recently, in the midst of all this, decided that they'd remove the ability of municipalities to use ranked ballots. I don't know why you do that unless you hate democracy. You know, and I don't really understand. I think there's lots of folks, to your point. I mean, there's lots of people who don't want that to change. You know, if I'm wealthy and I'm doing great, and I can invest lots of money in something, why would I? You know, I'm not going to go and support something else to change that. So I think we need the infrastructure in place from a government perspective to allow that and to encourage that, because it's not easy to get off the ground, and it's and I think SolarShare has benefited from those kinds of things. But I think I want more of that, and it's hard to get it otherwise.
I'm gonna answer my own question a bit differently, Chris, and see if this if you resonate with it or if you push back, and both are good. You know, we didn't wait for government. We didn't have any government support in pushing the bonds, and we didn't. And I've often wondered, you know, and one of the things that we did is, of course, we gave all of our IP to Tapestry Capital, because we want to see more and more of this. But I'm really concerned about leadership. I'm really concerned that we don't have an incentive structure in the social enterprise or next economy world that actually unlocks those entrepreneurial energies that have been normally in the for-profit sector to go into public benefit work. And I'm you know, there's crazy fools like me and a few others like that have, you know, that have pushed on that side of things to kind of, you know, put personal gain on the backside. But I think it's really inhibiting our ability to scale some of these ideas. And, you know, Tapestry's done an amazing job of supporting the nonprofit sector to adopt the bonds model. But I just don't see nearly enough. And, you know, we go to the banks and they say there isn't a market, and we're like, but our investors love us. Our investors want in, they're looking for more. I bet you that we have an 80% overlap in our investors.
Totally. Yeah.
And
yeah.
so like, what could we do to actually push a little harder on, like, how do we restructure our own thinking to incentivize entrepreneurial energy to take on more risks in this field? Because I have to say, I think the bonds model should be radically redesigning affordable housing in this province. I think all of your energy efficiency, geothermal should be completely scaled this way. Like, there's
a great example.
Right. And like the entire circular economy should be financed with community power, with community circular solutions. And I just don't understand what's holding us back as a field.
Yeah, you know, $1 million question. I struggle with that too. I'm not sure. I mean, because I believe in the model that we have here at SolarShare, CSI, and not-for-profit or cooperative model of democratic control. And that means, like, you know, I'm not personally getting wealthy from SolarShare. You know, that kind of thing. Like, I get it. Some folks, I think there's lots of interest in pursuing projects that, you know, you can put equity into. And I think there's a correlation there. Obviously, like, if you're building something with sweat equity, and you benefit from that in 10 years when you've built it up and have a big payday, I can see why that's attractive. I guess that's where I kind of go with what I'm talking about, an sort of overarching government. I mean, the whole system is set up around money. I think we've learned that, you know, focusing on money at the expense of everything else. Like, I learned quickly when I was in consulting that if you don't, like, people came and went really quickly in that organization. And if you're not making money, if you're not making more money than then you're costing the organization, then you're going to be gone super quickly. You know, and that's just the nature of it. And I think it's the same thing. Like, when we look at all the different, I mean, I don't know, there's so million, I mean, I have a harder time pointing out opposite examples, but like all the examples where corporations have done things to, or money has superseded the interest of people. I mean, we see, where is that not the case? And I feel like that's a serious issue. And I think that, and that's why I think we've designed the wrong system, is fundamentally what I believe. And I think there are, you know, people who benefit from that system aren't interested in changing it, frankly.
I think the question of who's actually in charge of the system is also an interesting question, right? Like, I think nobody thinks they're in charge. And I think that's the interesting thing, right? So that's where I think innovation plays such a critical role. And so we're seeing some really interesting, and I'd love to do an interview with somebody around stakeholder ownership. where they
Mhm.
actually, or sorry, stakeholders share holders. Anyway, but it's this interesting question of, we have some of these innovations that have taken hold, and this question of scale. And Eric Mellis on the chat says, unfortunately, the community financing approach is not scalable and is too complicated for big infrastructure projects. And maybe you want to comment on that.
I mean, I don't see why it isn't. I'm happy to chat about that. I mean, I think we need a little bit more imagination. I think to Tanya's point, your point earlier, like it's people don't under this. It's not a well advertised thing. There's not a lot of focus on this. I mean, everyone's focused on, putting in, starting a business and getting it, scaling it, getting a unicorn or whatever. And I just think the focus is different. And I think fundamentally we need to change the way that if we want a better and more equitable future, then I think we need to design it into how our organizations and our laws work, and what our focus is. And I think it's, we can take initiative to do that. And I think, Tanya, you've done, like, it's amazing what CSI has done. I think it's great what SolarShare has done. There's lots of work. Tapestry is doing a great work. Like, there's lots of people doing really excellent work that's really valuable. And I think in order to make it scale, I guess we need that. I think we need our governments to move that direction and help us with that. I think it's just such a big problem. It's not like we can do lots of this stuff, but ultimately, I think I'm interested in having the whole system change its focus, and we can do that piecemeal. And I think it'll have to happen piecemeal over time, as we have maybe more people will choose to start a cooperative instead, or a not-for-profit rather than a for-profit enterprise. And I think that's not a bad thing, but I think we need to have more help and effort go into changing that framework.
Yeah, totally. And if anybody's listening on this call today and has strong opinions about how we could actually incentivize this, I'd love to interview you. But back to the SolarShare projects. One of the things that we have as a question, I think it's a really interesting one, is, and it comes from our sponsor, Fix. It says, seeing as solar farms need maintenance, how does the team extend the lifespan of their assets and keep the solar arrays working at their best?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So what we do, we have our own operations and maintenance team. Our operations coordinator, Bob Ross, does a great job. We have part-time folks in the field. So we have projects across the province, and from Temiskaming to Ottawa to St. Catharines to Manitoulin Island, they're all over the place. And so what we do is we monitor them carefully. You can go to solarbonds.ca and you can monitor them yourselves if you're so inclined. And so we watch them carefully, and we do things like annual maintenance to make sure that they're operating well. We do things like maintenance of infrared photographs, so we know if any panels are broken and not operating properly. So we do a whole bunch of things like that to make sure that they last as long as they possibly can. And now our contracts are for 20 years with the government, but there's no they don't just stop working after 20 years. They'll continue to work, and hopefully the government at that time will be friendly to distributed energy and want to see those projects continue, and we can certainly do that. So there's projects like solar projects can last 30 years pretty easily, I think, with the right kind of maintenance. And so it's super critical that we monitor, and that's our revenue. So we're very cognizant of how well we're doing, and we monitor our downtime to make sure that we're that the projects are getting the revenue out of them that they need to, and producing clean electricity as much as possible.
Nice. And I think this is a good question. Eric actually has this question: do you have a credit facilities or cash in the bank to fund a particular project, or do you need to raise the money from the onset? So what's your timing in terms of the bridge?
Great. Yeah.
And I also heard a rumor at one point, and I don't know, tell me, it's like that you actually you had more money than you had projects at one point. And I guess I'm just curious how that, true? Yes, no? Tell me.
Not quite. That's a good question. No, it's a very good question. So the way we do it is we basically use private. So Community Power Capital was another cooperative that would finance the purchase of projects. So during construction, or whether we purchase the projects after they're operating, what happens is the bridge capital or construction capital is used until the project reaches commercial operation, at which point the risk is lowered because it has a contract, the project's operating and generating electricity. And then we, over time, we raise bonds to take out that bridge financing. And so that's how it works. It's very challenging from a cash flow perspective, to your point, Eric, about how, you know, it's hard to raise a bunch of money and then exactly and then do that. You have a cash flow issue. So we use that bridge financing. That's how we do it.
And I've got some, it's so funny, David Robertson, Brian Eiler, and Eric are all in the chat doing all sorts of things. So hi, guys. So just as we're getting a little bit closer, and I know that there'll be lots of questions, and I welcome them. I guess just to kind of reflect on what you see as some of the biggest challenges facing SolarShare as you move forward. And yeah, tell us what you're focusing on right now.
We just closed our most recent offering. We raised about $14.5 million. We submitted our next offering statement to the regulator, and so we're waiting to hear back on that. So, you know, it's exciting times for us. We're trying to buy a few other projects that are similar, and so, you know, for us, I think the name of the game is seeing if we can buy more assets that are very similar to, you know, have more democratic control of those assets and continue to do what we're doing. You know, the challenges that face us, you know, this government hasn't been super helpful. That's unfortunate, but it doesn't affect us other than that they've canceled some FIT projects that weren't yet built. So it didn't really affect us in that way. You know, we find that we have a reinvestment rate. So we have a maturity event next year where we're going to have $10 million coming due. Typically we see 70% of our investors or our members want to reinvest. And so, you know, we do that and then sell more bonds to do the rest of the financing. And so I think we've gotten, I think, through a few different challenges, but in particular with this government, but you know, I think really what we want to do is continue to build SolarShare in the same way. And if we can do long-term contracts to do that in a similar manner, then that's what I'd like to do. In terms of, you know, other things other than SolarShare, I think because I guess our model is somewhat limited in the sense that we've built it on FIT contracts in Ontario. That's sort of unique, but obviously I'm interested in other ways in which we can, you know, democratically control and finance other renewable energy projects. Geothermal is a great example. Maybe it's a different vehicle. But I think the challenge from my perspective is, how do we do this more? I want to see more of SolarShare or similar organizations doing everything from geothermal to energy efficiency to buying buildings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I couldn't agree more, Chris. And you know, I think that the opportunity to take this extraordinary model and to use it to democratize our energy is a critical social justice issue. And as we are looking at the future sustainability of our planet, I think it's leaders like you and like SolarShare who have been phenomenal and helping us to reimagine a world that actually reflects our values of people and planet, that's regenerative, equitable, and prosperous for all. So I want to thank you. We're going to open it up to a whole bunch of questions, but I do want to just thank you for making the time, for sharing what you're doing, and I think most importantly for doing the work you do, because I know, I know it ain't easy all the time, and keeping that idea of scale and energy efficiency at the center. Well done. So thank you so much for being with us here today and helping us reimagine the world, Chris.
My pleasure. It's I really feel I feel privileged to be here, and you know, I'm lucky to have the job that I do. I'm a very lucky guy. So I get to work, and it's easy to get out of bed to do this kind of work. So thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Great. So Zoya, why don't we take a few questions here, shall we?
Yeah, sure. So there's a question that came up that says, what are the risks of buying solar shares and green bonds during this volatile economic time?
Well, so, yeah, the thing I should say to you is go and read our offering statement. Right now, we don't have one open, but that's the main way to understand the risks the best. But, I think in terms of how it's, this time has changed SolarShare, it actually hasn't impacted us that much. We found like some of the things that we dealt with, like working from home. I'm lucky I can work from home. A lot of our staff can. So it hasn't affected us that much in that sense. Some of the things that I found amazing were when this all happened, we learned that we got a third of our revenue from physical checks by the local distributor, like Toronto Hydro or whomever, sending us literally a check. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't know that. Let's get rid of that. Let's do it electronically. So those are but those are pretty minor in comparison to the rest of the economy. So I think generally speaking, our model hasn't changed. We have long-term contracts with the government of Ontario that are still in play, and we don't expect to change. Our systems are operating well. This is the best year we've had for revenue ever. And we've raised a whole bunch of money, more money than we've raised before. So I think I like to say, I think we're in a good position historically. Yeah.
That's awesome. Great to hear. There was another question that came up around whether SolarShare partners with others on projects and programs. And there was actually another question that came up during the registration for this event. So I'll just maybe frame it in that one, which is, what is your philosophy on forming or structuring strategic partnerships and joint ventures with other cooperatives, corporations, and community groups?
I mean, certainly we've worked with lots of different cooperatives. Some of the cooperative principles speak to working with other cooperatives. So, we're eager to do that. One of the things that's challenging, I think what we learned earlier on in the life of SolarShare was that we wanted to get to a certain size in order to pay for people like me, for, audited financial statements, for legal fees, all these kinds of things that come up. And it's really hard to do it on a volunteer basis. And so smaller cooperatives that weren't able to get to that size, we've worked with them to buy their projects at reasonable prices. And so we've done a lot of that. Certainly we do have joint ventures with other local utility companies, with other organizations. So we're certainly amenable to that. I mean, we're a cooperative organization. We want more cooperation, not less. So, we try and do business transparently and work with our partners to have win-win situations.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
I'm jumping in. Zoya and I are chatting back and forth and checking out all the chat and the comments. So if that's okay, I'll chime in with that one, Zoya. Mm-hmm. So curious about other projects. So solar is your focus. Geothermal was noted before. Can you speak bigger picture about potential for other projects? And then in the chat, Eric Mellis asked about, what about hydrogen, which might be contentious, yeah. But.
Yeah, Eric, it's dangerous to ask me about hydrogen. In terms of other types of product, I mean, SolarShare is focused on solar in Ontario, at least for the time being. I think we've made a strategic decision that, we're interested in doing more of the same. We think there's opportunity to do more of the same, and so we'll continue to do so. Okay, so that part aside, other things. Yes, Tanya mentioned geothermal. I think that's a great idea. Like, we're sort of at a stage of trying to electrify everything. I think, Ontario, we're fortunate to have really low carbon intensive electricity. I think we could use way more distributed energy. I think we could use way more geothermal. We could use way more energy efficiency. And there are people working on like Energy Efficiency Capital, our friends at CoPower. There are organizations who are doing that kind of work, and I want to see more of that. And I think, better again if it's democratically controlled. Hydrogen, I worked in, when I did my graduate work, I was working in what's called autothermal reforming. So you're taking gasoline and essentially stripping off the hydrogen to use it in fuel cells. I think hydrogen is, it's been making a comeback in terms of its utility. I think if you can use it, if you can get it from an electrolyzer, I think it makes sense. You can stick it back into the natural gas infrastructure for what it's worth. I could see it being used in industrial facilities, certainly, where we're trying to do smelting or big furnaces, that kind of thing. Where hydrogen is going to go in terms of mobile and stuff, I don't see that happening anytime soon, personally. But certainly, I think there's room for hydrogen. Whether I'm sort of technology agnostic, provided it's a climate solution in my mind.
Great, thank you. There was a question from someone named Ruth, and they were asking how recent grads can get involved in medium-sized solar enterprises or nonprofits like SolarShare, or what opportunities are there for them. They're saying that they're really passionate about the work that's being done and how they can actively build a cooperative and circular economy, but they're having trouble finding opportunities to professionally contribute to the small, medium-sized work environments.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, on Ontario right now, and so I guess if you're talking specifically about solar, it's challenging. I mean, what happened is we had the Green Energy Act. We built it, like, you have to remember, like 15 years ago, I remember going to conferences, and I remember TAF was doing some great work on this, and they were doing pilots and stuff and trying to figure it out. And it was like, okay, well, we don't know we don't have any engineers, we don't have any lawyers, we don't know how to install it, we don't know what the roof leases look like. No one knew anything. And now we have a huge depth of experience in solar because we've built it up in our province because we've incentivized that. And I think that's a smart thing to do. And so right now, because of the way that the government has canceled FIT contracts prematurely, that means a whole bunch of folks are looking for work in the solar industry. So I don't think it's hard, I think, if I was starting out looking for solar opportunities. What I do is, I'd get on different email lists. SolarShare has a newsletter. I think the Ontario Cooperative Association would be a good place to go. Follow CSI. I think, Tapestry, Trek, those kinds of organizations, I think would be really good to follow in terms of getting in there. I don't know. I've been fortunate and sort of lucky / interested. So it's worked for me, but I think it's a challenging, especially with the COVID. I mean, we're not even mentioning COVID. I mean, it's really hard. I don't envy your position. I'm happy to talk to you personally if you just reach out, and I'm happy to talk to you more about it.
Yeah, and would it be all right if we follow up with your contact info?
Oh yeah, sure. Just call me if you want to talk.
Awesome. Shay, were there any other questions that stood out to you?
Sure, just one specifically about FIT, so the feed-in tariff program. So some legal opinion has it that the Ontario government could actually rescind or amend FIT contracts. Is this possible or likely?
There was talk, I think, earlier this year before COVID that the government was going to review contracts and trying to renegotiate them. I don't think the government's going to rescind our contracts. You'd make a whole bunch of people pissed off if you did that, not just us, the small community folks, but all the lenders and stuff. Like, we have commercial lenders too that would get pretty upset about that. So I don't think that's in the government's best interest. I think that we all saw them cancel those wind projects east of here. I think both of them. That was political in my mind. It just is going to cost us a ton of money. It's really. I honestly, I went to a meeting, a solar meeting back in the day when this government had just, when you could meet in person, and this government had just been elected, and one of the deputy ministers came and talked to the solar industry in the room, and they basically said, "You guys are a bunch of crooks, and you guys have a real communication problem." Wow. Okay, so you guys have really drunk the juice here. I don't think they're going to come after us because I think they've sort of done that and their hands are full with COVID, but I mean, they're anti-democratic. So they're spending time on that. So, I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I just don't think it would be successful if they did. And I certainly haven't heard anything that would make me concerned about that.
Well, I'm just going to pop in and say, watch what they're doing with the Greenbelt. It's pretty freaky stuff right now. So I don't know. I think we have to be vigilant and aware, and we don't lose ground in some of these areas.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wouldn't put anything past this government, but my point is, I think it's intertwined with a whole bunch of other people, and they can't just start willy-nilly doing that, because I think it would cause them way more problems than they want. If they want to cancel one thing or another, then that's fine, but it's not fine. I don't like it, but
yeah, it is what it is.
I don't agree with this government. I don't know what I don't like them. Yeah.
Great.
And one question from me, if that's okay. It kind of speaks to Kathy's question about scaling renewables. Given the unprecedented time that we're in, what are the key actions that you think public entities in particular could take at this time to support the transition, the energy transition? And then I think relatedly, maybe if you want to have the last word, kind of like what brings you hope what keeps you going.
So when you say public, you mean like the government?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a lot of questions have come up around FIT and how SolarShare got started. And so there's definitely tools at our disposal, and we know that we have immense challenges, and that we need bold leadership. So yeah.
Right. So I guess, thanks. Yeah. So I think the key that, what happened in 2010 to now is that the price of solar dropped dramatically, along with wind. I mean, now wind and solar in the world, on the world basis, are cheaper than any other option in terms of electricity. Now you can add along caveats to that, and Canada's slightly different, but the fact of the matter is that we're at the point where solar and wind and other technologies that are low carbon make sense. And so what we need is, in order to make that work, is not a FIT contract anymore, but we just need to have the regulations in place that would allow us to do that. And so this government doesn't really have any interest in allowing that to happen. And I think, so that's what I mean. Like, I feel like the government plays a strong role here. I mean, I'm keen to go ahead and do it regardless of what the government thinks, but it's challenging to do that. So in terms of net metering regulation, what's called virtual net metering, like right now, we'd love to go and set up a project and be able to sell electricity to all the people on this call, but we can't technically do that with the regulations in Ontario. They've done it in the States and lots of different jurisdictions. It's not that it's not technically possible, it certainly is. We just choose not to here. So I think those are the kinds of things that I think would be the key support from my mind, to just let it, put this regulations in place and let us do it. And I will happily go do that. In terms of what gives me hope, I mean, I think, the good stuff that's happening, like, you can see what we can accomplish together, whether it's CSI or SolarShare or Tapestry or any of the other amazing things. Like, really, it's there's lots of really good people doing lots of really good work, and so that really does give me hope. I have to be optimistic. I'm an optimistic person, I think, by nature, and so it is challenging with governments like this, and with the COVID crisis, and with the election in the South that was difficult to watch, and with the climate crisis all in front of us. But I think we're smart enough to be able to make these changes, and I think the folks, like youth in particular, are things like the Sunrise Movement, like they're really doing great stuff. And I think I have lots of hope in that demographic, and so off we go. I think we have the tools at our disposal. I think that's the thing. We can do it. We need I would like some help from the government to be able to do it a bit better. But we have the tools at our disposal, I think, to solve our own problems.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really nice note to end on. Thank you so much, Chris. And thanks everyone for the great questions. That was a really nice Q&A period. And as we wrap up, wanted to let you know that we will follow up with a link to this recording so you can rewatch it and share it with your friends. And we'll follow up with Chris's contact info as well. And we put in the chat a survey. If you can take 2 minutes to tell us about your experience today, that would be great, so we know how to plan for future events. Tanya, is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap?
Thank you, Zoya. Thank you, Chris. And thank you to all the participants that joined us today. It's such a pleasure to be engaging these conversations, and watch for us next month.
Yeah, we'll see you again soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
All the
Thanks,
best.
everyone.
Bye-bye.